Hello and welcome. My name is Frederick Ade, and I'm a postgraduate here at the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative, or ELTI. ELTI is an initiative of the Yale School of the Environment focused on capacity development for conservation and restoration of tropical forest landscapes. I am joined today by my colleagues, Gillian Bloomfield, ELTI's Associate Director of Online Programs, and Abiok, ELTI's Programs Administrator. We are delighted to welcome you today to the official launch of our four-part webinar series titled The Evolving Role of Biodiversity Credits in Global Conservation. Throughout the 4 weeks of April, we will be sharing the perspectives and ideas of experts and practitioners in biodiversity credits across the globe. Today, we will discuss the theme Biodiversity Credits, Market, Scope, and Demands. Next week, that is April 10, we will talk about biodiversity credits project design. On April 17, we will talk about practical considerations that inform biodiversity markets. And on April 24, we will wrap up with monitoring and verification of biodiversity credit projects. Each session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Jorge Forero, one of ELTI's student fellows and the moderator for today's session. Jorge.
Thank you so much, Fred, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us. Today, we will discuss the theme, Biodiversity Credits, Market Scope, and Demands, and we are so pleased to be joined by our four speakers, David Meyers, who is the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, who will be providing a keynote address, and then we will have the talk by David Fortson, Chief Growth Officer of Regen Network Development. And at the end of our webinar session of today, we will have Patita Nkamunu, co-founder and project lead at EarthAcre. Also, we will have Mark Tracy, the chairman and co-founder of EarthAcre. So, as I mentioned before, we have divided today's session into three parts. First, we will have David Meyers with his keynote introduction to the theme of this series, which is expected to be 10 minutes. It would be followed by two presentations with brief Q&A at the end of each session. More questions will be addressed in the end of the Q&A as well. In order to have subtitles and prepare for variability in internet connectivity, our speakers have kindly pre-recorded their talks to be broadcasted during the session. And today's session will be close with some announcements around 10 a.m. Eastern US time. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be sent by email in the next few days as we will be posted at ELTI's YouTube channel. Please place your questions in the Q&A feature during the session. So to kick off this webinar series, we're pleased to be joined by David Meyers. David is an environmental finance expert and entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience in sustainability, business strategy and management, environmental economics, international conservation and development, and environmental impact assessment. David has spent well over a decade in Madagascar and has worked in 46 countries. In Madagascar, he helped the country plan and execute a tripling of the area under conservation, with including establishing the Makita National Park protected area using the RED Plus financing. He holds a doctorate in biological anthropology and anatomy from Duke University and an MBA from the Yale School of Management. David, would you like to open your camera and mic and say hello to our audience as we prepare your video.
Thank you, Jorge. Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the webinar and some Q&A. Thank you.
I'd like to present to you an overview of nature conservation and restoration units, otherwise called nature credits or biodiversity credits or a range of other mechanisms. So why are we interested in nature biodiversity credits? Well, nature provides an enormous range of ecosystem services, very few of which are monetizable, meaning we can generate revenue streams from only the exploitation of nature, say through forestry or fisheries, or some other use categories like recreation, or carbon, for example, in terms of climate regulation. But there's a whole range of ecosystem services which are not captured by markets and currently not accessible to help generate funding for nature. And so the idea of nature or biodiversity credits has been to try to capture some of those additional ecosystem services. The definition of what a biodiversity credit is, and this is elaborated by the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, so through consultations and a lot of work, is a biodiversity credit is a certificate that represents a measured and evidence-based unit of positive biodiversity outcome that is durable and additional to what would have otherwise occurred. So I find it interesting that the biodiversity credit is defined as a certificate in the definition. So that just goes to show how it's a little confusing what these units are. And to make matters hopefully a little more clear, we could, if we divide up types of impacts or dependencies on nature into planned impacts or dependencies on nature services, you can see that there's some mechanisms that already exist, for example, to manage planned impacts, such as voluntary offsets for biodiversity. These could be required either through the banking sector, banks are supporting the Equator Principles, a lot of the development banks like the World Bank or IFC, they follow practice standards or performance standards. And then there's compliance offsets, more of a regulatory market-based approach, such as biodiversity offsets or wetland banking, for example, in the US, Colombia, Australia, and places where it works quite well. But for dependencies, there really are fewer options. There are fewer products out there. Payment for ecosystem services in some ways does that. User pays fees for entrance to protected area. But this is where the voluntary biodiversity certificates or credits generally can be found. And then I also want to point out that there really are few, if any, jurisdictional markets for dependency on nature. And this is where I think there's great opportunity in a kind of regulatory approach to nature credits or certificates. So what nature credits, they're adding an additional approach to nature finance. It's important to remember that they are not a silver bullet. They're not going to solve the financing gap. They're not going to solve the financing needs. They should be additional to the key role the communities, governments, and the private sector plays to support and promote nature. They should not generally be used as offsets, certainly not as an excuse to harm nature or compensate for the harm that you're providing to nature. Generally, they should reflect justice and the central role of Indigenous people and local communities, or the stewards of the ecosystems. There are a range of integrity, good governance, clarity for claims, different third-party registries. There's over 20 existing standards or methodologies out there being developed, over 30 more in preparation. There are a range of actors who are trying to provide overall guidance. Recently released framework has been produced by the International Advisory Panel for Biodiversity Credits, the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, and the World Economic Forum that provides some guidance on what a high integrity credit should look like. There's also extreme differences in the different methodologies that are being proposed. There's different approaches to the overall goals, whether it's a species focus, such as wildlife credits in Namibia, or ecosystem. Most of them are around ecosystem, a few of them around functions. Some address actions that can reduce the threats or direct protection. There's a whole range of metrics. Some of them are fixed by the standard, others are flexible and allow different choices to be made. Some are very high tech, remote sensing, camera traps, sound, DNA, things like that. And they vary enormously in terms of their ease of implementation and the cost of implementation. Some of them, in terms of biodiversity change, some methodologies seek to record change over time, some relative to a counterfactual, others compared to a specific ideal. Almost all of them require some form of additionality or proof that the financing through the credit resulted in a change. And then there's stewardship versus change. I'll get into some stewardship ideas in a moment, but here, if you're only looking for change and areas have been well managed, how do you avoid excluding Indigenous people, local communities, and other well managed areas like protected areas from getting some financing through these approaches? And then there's a whole range of approaches around significance. How do you prioritize certain areas? Are you looking at threats? Are you looking at endangered species, key biodiversity areas? Is the significance linked to the number of credits issued, or is it simply an attribute? And then there's a whole range of approaches with regard to claims. One of the most interesting is, whether a company, for example, could claim purchasing credits would result in a nature positive outcome. Generally, that is not considered appropriate. But overall, we'd like to see nature positive outcomes for society. In terms of, just to try to clarify a little bit of what I just described before, you have different approaches. So say that you have a declining counterfactual, which is this yellow line here that shows a decrease in the condition of biodiversity over time. This is over a 20-year period. And one type of credit you could produce would be, you could call it a maintenance credit, where you maintain biodiversity levels in light of what would have been a declining situation. So that's a kind of change over a counterfactual. You could also restore habitat. That would be a kind of uplift, and that could be over a stable approach or over a declining counterfactual. So these are different approaches. Often you're measuring or generating credits for this change over time, change against a predicted outcome. Nature stewardship certificates are a concept that we've been working on. The goal here is to support well-managed or at least high-integrity ecosystems, giving them the greatest chance for long-term conservation, larger or more valuable ecosystem services. Here, this tries to address the issue that Indigenous people have been excluded from carbon financing, for example, through this counterfactual criteria. And we've received some strong support for this concept through a public consultation we did with Vera. And here's what the stewardship certificate might look like. Much higher initial condition, and you maintain that condition over time. This is a scale of 0 to 1, where 1 would be a perfectly intact ecosystem. So it just gives you an idea of some of the approaches that people are using. In terms of the credit units, generally hit wide range, but they are often an area-based, so an extent-based unit multiplied by or dependent upon the condition of the area. And as I mentioned earlier, significance, although quite important, generally has not been used to determine the number of credits and the number of units, which is interesting and potentially problematic. So here's an example of a group, Bloom Labs put this together with their colleagues BioInt to show different approaches that go into the credit calculation. You could have species approaches, ecosystem approaches, or other. And you can see where a lot of that overlaps. It also gives you an idea of some of the diversity of approaches and actors in the space. Going further, here's their map of some of the biodiversity credit market actors here and different roles that people are playing. But you can see it can be quite the complex ecosystem of actors. Everyone seems to be getting involved in the space. In part to address this complexity, the CFA and partners like IAPB and Conservation International are developing this Nature Finance Accelerator. The idea is to advance clarity in the markets, advancing thus investments in biodiversity or nature credits with diverse stakeholders. That is an ongoing thing. And if you are looking for more information, there's a wealth of knowledge at the Biodiversity Credit Alliance website. Some of the papers, reports that they've produced themselves. And there's also a good resource library with the International Advisory Panel for Biodiversity Credits. And they have their own publications as well as a list of really great resources for further information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for preparing this address and in general for guiding our team throughout the development of this webinar series. Well, now for our first guest speaker, we'll have another David Fortson. He has spent his career in pursuit of building a better world through mission-driven business and finance. David co-founded and served as CEO of Loacom, a mission-driven communications and strategy firm for over a decade, working with the likes of 1% of the planet, All Good Products, Regen Network, and Regenerative Organic Alliance. David, while our team gets the video up, I would like to welcome you to this webinar series. Would you like to activate your microphone and camera to say hello to our attendees today?
Greetings, everybody from, well, it's still a little dark, but I'm in Santa Barbara. It's nice to be here and looking forward to connecting with you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, David.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is David Fortson. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Regen Network Development Public Benefit Corporation. We're a US-based company that has developed ecological software accounting, so for ecological assets. And I'm here today to talk to you about biodiversity and nature markets, to give you a sense of where biodiversity crediting is at in particular, and its effect on the climate finance and where it fits in the broader effort to address climate change. So I'll be taking through a number of slides that touch on a little bit of what we do here at R&D, a little bit about where the market, some of the challenges with the market, where the market trends are currently, and give you an insight into some of the projects that we're working on as examples and case studies that might be useful to help land, like what is a biodiversity credit and how do we work with it. So moving in. So Regen Network, our vision is regeneration over commodification. This speaks a little bit to the idea that we need to go beyond sustainability, and we certainly need to go beyond the commodification of nature, which is a danger. I think that everyone or many people understand that reducing nature to carbon or reducing nature and even externalizing nature has its risks in disconnecting the value that nature provides us, not only as the base foundation for really all life, but also the service it provides to business, the service it provides to us individually as humans, from like anything from a spiritual perspective all the way to just having basic clean air, clean water to be able to function here on this space rock we call planet Earth. So we're looking, you know, our posture is as a company, and I think many in the kind of sustainability movement are looking to move from the idea of net zero, which is more or less do no harm, into fundamental ecological regeneration. One of the biggest challenges that we face is as living and working in a society in really in the global economy, primarily driven by capitalism. If we don't have nature on the balance sheet, if we don't have nature fully integrated into economic policy and decision making, we're going to have major problems. Externalizing the costs to nature is nothing more than moving debt into the future on top for our kids and their kids to deal with. So our goal is to be able to, through what we call regenerative finance, be able to integrate ecological health directly into economic conversations, directly into policy, directly into every interaction that we have as humans interacting with each other, and as individuals from nation states interacting with each other in everyday business. So what we've built at Regen Network is a full stack ecological asset management system. We built a public ecological ledger, otherwise known as a blockchain. We feel like this is an excellent use of blockchain, given that blockchain is really excels at avoiding double counting. So in other words, you can't sell something twice, offering radical transparency, offering auditability and traceability, all of which serve to, in the development of ecological markets, build trust. Through transparency, through this traceability and auditability, it gives every actor, from the project developers, farmers, and indigenous communities who are helping develop these ecological assets, all the way to the buyers like Microsoft or Mercedes, the ability to all be able to see what is the ecological data, what are the claims, who is getting paid and when, and what is the impact. Is there a verified impact that will bring integrity to ecological markets and allow for their decentralized and rapid growth across the world. So we can go into this at some point, but it's a three-part system. We have a marketplace, or at the bottom, excuse me, is a Regen ledger, which is our blockchain. It's a publicly governed, like I said, ecological ledger. That means it's publicly owned by the token holders. We have a Regen registry program and related application software that allows us to take the core, build on top of the core ledger, and then allows us to actually tokenize natural capital assets and give powers of governance, of design, distribution, and sales, all within our application software, and then rolling up to our marketplace, which allows for the tracking of all sales. So, I think as this was came out during COVID, but I think it is a really poignant understanding, or at least for the scientific community, and trying to land this. We're just a speck in the bottom left-hand corner of cities. And yes, COVID was a reminder of how interconnected we are. And then the related recession that, really hit in a lot of ways globally. Climate change is always omnipresent these days and a growing issue on the horizon. But behind all of that is the biodiversity collapse. If we continue our pathway of radical loss of biodiversity from plant and animal species, that we are going to have an incredibly difficult time mitigating those impacts, let alone repairing them in a sensible time frame to bring stability back to ecological cycles. So these are, I've been named a number of different ways, what are deemed the 5 major threats to biodiversity. All of these are creating rapid disruptions, in the past 100 years that many times prove very difficult to allow for nature's ecosystems to adapt. Nature has an incredible ability to adapt to changes and disruptions, but when they're occurring simultaneously in all corners of the globe, unmitigated, at least at scale, it is a recipe for significant challenges. So I thought this was a poignant quote. We're at an inflection point where humanity is facing the deepest and most unprecedented great choice: to continue on the same nature negative path, accelerate towards catastrophic planetary tipping points and put our existence at risk, or change course towards a net zero, nature positive, safer, and more equitable future. BlackRock, which is one of the largest movers of capital in the globe, has officially recognized natural capital as an investment factor. And they estimate, along with PricewaterhouseCoopers, that 55% of the global GDP, about approximately $58 trillion, is directly dependent on nature. So that means that the banking industry, the military, the insurance industry, and many CPG products are already incorporating in developing climate resilience into their business systems as a simple way of mitigating risk and survival. So we need to organize and harness capital, $7.5 trillion by 2030 to address biodiversity and climate goals. And this is from the United Nations estimate. So we've got to scale capital rapidly. And how are we going to do that? We need to invest in ecological systems. So I think we found that the carbon markets have been quite established, but they've also suffered a number of public relations hits, and others would call maybe small errors. But nonetheless, markets are emotional, right? And if they're under attack because of honest or maybe dishonest mistakes or dishonest actors, that is affecting our ability to garner and harness capital to invest in ecological repair. So this is what some examples of some of the carbon markets that are going to point to how do we mitigate some of these challenges with carbon markets when we develop nature markets that are based on biodiversity health. So the way we approach things, less top-down, less hierarchical, and more a network of how do we design relationships between all of the actors, from land stewards to scientists to technologists to governments and policymakers, using technology and the ability to develop right relationships between actors that offer equity, offer sovereignty, and offer biocultural and bioregional approaches to repairing the planet. So our approach is more on the right-hand side with this network effect. Where the market's at today, to give you a sense, it's new, it's nascent. Last year was really the first year of this market. So the area covered by biodiversity credit sales was approximately 1.7 million hectares. There are indigenous-led projects that are being developed right now, which is exciting, but they're still a small amount. But we'll get into why indigenous-led is important. Buyers are from the West and often small to medium-sized enterprises, and preservation dominates. So right now, one of the easiest ways to protect biodiversity is verified long-term protection of land. And again, not to overthink it, but until we can protect land, it's hard to protect biodiversity. And so this is one of the early entrants into the credit market, is verified long-term 10-year land protection, regardless of where it happens in the world. And then that companies, and this is just an indicator, companies are trying to figure out how to communicate about their investment in biodiversity assets. You'll find also a little bit of a hurdle. Unlike carbon credits, which are associated with offsetting a carbon footprint, how do companies engage biodiversity? Where does it live on their balance sheet? What can they communicate about, and why, without getting a front page story on the newspaper that calls them greenwashing? So these are some of the hurdles in biodiversity credit markets. The lack of standardization. Biodiversity is complicated. There's many things we can measure, and it's hard to understand if we should commodify and drill down into one common unit, or to have multiple units that we can understand and build credibility around. The use case, as I mentioned previously, and it's early, right? So you need pioneers in an early market. Last year, it was only a $5.2 million market, and you saw this slides before that we need to be scaling billions of dollars. So this market needs to grow, evolve, and mature rapidly. But we've started, and some of our work here at Regen Network is embedded in this graph with Tarasos, ERA, are both projects that have built on Regen Network, to give you a sense. These are some of the different projects that we have launched on Regen Network to give you a sense. Jaguar stewardship in Brazil. This is an umbrella species methodology that anchors around the presence of jaguar as a means of keeping overhead low for monitoring, reporting, verification, knowing that jaguars are quite sensitive to ecological habitat changes. And if they're present, you're typically good. If they're not, it's a problem. But this is a project we've launched on Regen. El Globo Habitat Bank. This is Tarasos. This is a 30-year protection of 10 square meters per credit. Very simple, very straightforward. It's got some really interesting performance metrics in order to issue the credits, verified impact. But this is another really well-established project developer in Colombia. that has issued some of the most enterprise-ready credits that we're excited to share. And then the first marine biodiversity credit. They're called biodiversity blocks, and these focus around restoration of mangroves, coral, and kelp. So very exciting. Again, all based on verified impact. Can you show that you restored land and that land can be restored and cared for a period of time is often the baseline for the development of an ecological asset. And then the biocultural jaguar credits. This is a unique one that we'll start to end on. This is based on the protection of, this is based on working directly with an Achuar Nation community, the Shadamensa community at the Amazon headwaters, where they basically are trying to beat back roads. So roads are a huge threat. The folks who are trying to put roads in, or miners, are approaching these communities and asking or offering them payment to build roads and so they can bring in mines and logging. What we are doing is providing them an alternative revenue source through offering the development of what we call biocultural jaguar credits that integrate both the ecological health indicators, like are forests still standing, are jaguars still present, as well as integrating socio type indicators, like their integration of their life plan. So this is trying to acknowledge the holistic approach to ancestral land stewardship. Ancestral land stewardship being, yes, we're protecting ecology, but we also have human goals and societal goals for these communities that need to be honored and wrapped into the development of assets so that they're not externalized, further disenfranchising and essentially colonializing these communities that have stewarded forests for years. So these are the communities. This is literally the community that we're working with, the Shadamensa community. This hold the line graph you see is the various communities that are all working to protect this area of forest from mining and road development. And these are some of the limits, right? Lack of trust. It's expensive often to develop credits, and it's often inefficient. So how do we marry verified ecological impact with the needs, the culture, and the processes of indigenous communities? And this is really going to be one of the major issues that faces all of us in the West, in particular in approaching the global South and their cultures and communities and their long stewardship of land, is how do we do this in a way that honors their sovereignty and values while protecting the forest and developing the right relationship between capital and ecological preservation. So the new way forward, and this is tying us up here. So what we did was we centered indigenous sovereignty and governance over asset design and distribution. We integrated social and cultural values. We integrated indigenous people into the monitoring and reporting to make sure that they got paid to monitor, report, and which can still be verified by other third parties if necessary, and to be transparent with the distribution of finances, and then frankly ensure that, you know, for every dollar spent, at least 60% of that was going directly to the land stewards, the ancestral land stewards, versus all of that getting eaten up by intermediaries or being, frankly, just unclear about the distribution of resources. And I thought you'd appreciate this. This is what a camera trap and it can capture in a forest. So the indication of that jaguar that you just saw helps verify the impact and the health of the forest and helps unlock capital from the global north and sends that to the global south. And if you want to take a photo, you can take a photo. You can learn more about this particular credit. And I hope you learned a little bit more about the state of biodiversity markets and biodiversity crediting. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, David. And we will have time for one question now, and then we will address additional questions later in the session. So towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned the challenges and honoring the sovereignty and values of indigenous peoples while protecting the forest and developing a relationship with capital. One of the questions that we received is if you can speak a little bit more about the process of establishing this relationship with indigenous communities, and how do you explain biodiversity credits to these groups?
Great. And this is pointed at me, David Fortson, yeah? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks everyone for listening again. It's a good question, and it's one of the probably more important questions to consider when developing ecological assets in the Global South in particular. So there's a few things to point out. One, credits as a general concept, with, even indigenous communities and deep in the forest still have smartphones. And frankly, the bad reputation of the credit industry is pretty strong most everywhere in Global South communities, and that creates immediate hurdles that we've found. So how that is addressed, one, we still do work with local NGOs that are bioregional based who have a connection. So like, for example, we work with a group in Quito called Fundación Pachamama that already has a community member that works for that NGO that interfaces with the Global North organizations like ourselves. And pardon me if I'm skipping, and helps us adequately engage the community at the cultural level. So, for example, our company, even though we're a software company, we work with Fundación Pachamama ourselves and the Shara community, and we literally sit in circle with them in their governance processes, their asambleas, their other internal processes. And what we call is we move slowly and at the speed of trust. And this is really important, right? Like in the global north, we tend to want to immediately get action, come up with agendas and plans and get things done. And many of these communities, and again, speaking for the LATAM communities we're working with in the global south, have slower, more deliberate governance processes that require trust building, require not bringing, frankly, the global north way of doing business into the global south. And we take the lead of these communities in identifying how slowly and deliberately answering the questions, showing the tools, and going through the processes and listening to the stories of how the forest is being protected now, the needs of the community. And I think a big part of it was the agreement to, in this particular case with the biocultural jaguar credit, to figure out a way to integrate their life plan into the development of these assets. Again, which was allowing the full integration of nature, that they don't see themselves different from nature where we do, and their life plan, their ability to sustainably harvest and take from the forest and use it for their day-to-day cultural and just practical human needs is deeply part of their experience and their ability to be ancestral land stewards. We worked with them to incorporate that into a credit, and that every time an organization, institution, or philanthropist purchases those credits, that they are underwriting the support explicitly that is an important part of this long-term preservation. That is a shared goal, both at the community level and the global north capital level. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, David Fortson, for your response and for those important insights and how you're working with communities. Now we want to get to our final talk of the day with Patita and Mark from EarthAcre. So first I will introduce our speakers. Patita Nkamunu is an impact-driven conservation professional with experience in natural resource conservation, policy lobbying, advocacy, and public engagement. Her work integrates conservation and climate change mitigation in Africa using capacity building, cross-sectoral partnerships, research, and the empowerment of both women and indigenous communities. Her colleague, Mark Tracy, has spent the majority of his career on the intersection of food, finance, technology, and public policy. For over 20 years, Mark served in leadership roles at Cargill and Indigo Ag, and was most recently CEO of Perennial, a leading measurement, reporting, and verification platform for soil-based carbon removal. We welcome Patita and Mark. While our team gets up the video, I would like to invite you to open your mic and your camera and say hello to our attendees today.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Tracy, Chairman of the Board of EarthAcre.
Hi, my name is Patita Nkamunu, co-founder and head of project at EarthAcre.
We're here to talk today about EarthAcre and pioneering a new model for nature stewardship. This is one of our trial sites in Kenya. This is Maasai-owned land, not far from Amboseli National Park, for those of you who know the geography of Kenya. This is an area that our community has worked to regenerate actively for decades. And within less than a kilometer from this site, this picture was taken only a few days after the prior picture. And this is a piece of land that was sold by a community member and is now in private hands, and this is being converted to agriculture. And so what we want to talk to you today is about a new model for nature stewardship that starts to appropriately value nature and the ecosystem services that it provides. And most importantly, gets payments back to the individuals on the ground responsible for that stewardship. Because this current model that we have is broken, and we've seen this somewhat in the voluntary carbon market. And so really EarthAcre was founded around these core principles of ensuring that we had scientific rigor in everything that we were doing, full transparency to the data and the transactions, but finally, and most importantly, that the community would be at the center of everything that we were doing, and that we would have trackable and traceable benefits down to individuals. So getting back to the problem, we currently don't understand how to value nature properly. And probably the only place that we value nature at all is through extractive industries. And even then, we're not valuing it properly and accounting for the externalities of some of the losses that we have of those ecosystem services associated with the extraction of these nature assets. So, with the community that we work with, and Patita can talk more about this, one of the few alternatives to try to increase income if there is a loss in ecotourism, for example, or a decline in cattle prices for managed grazing, is to convert these pieces of land into agriculture, which is often highly unsustainable because of the nature of the land. And so you can only pull out a crop for a couple of years of maize or wheat. But there's heavy pesticide use. We drain the water table, and then we have degraded soil that results in desertification. And maybe you can get $100 a year out of doing that. Or you can sell your land, which results in a one-time payment, but you lose that asset, your connection to your culture, and there's permanent destruction of biodiversity. And what we usually see is the first thing the new buyer does is they put up a fence around that land. Patita, is there anything you want to add about that?
Just to add is that money from tourism, which is the only product that currently has been developed, goes to the government. And that money or investment never finds its way back to the landowners or communities who co-manage the wildlife with the government. So as a result of this is what then happens. People opt for these other uses as a result of no benefit sharing at all, or no income coming from the work that they're already doing.
Thank you for that segue, because the vast majority of Earth's remaining biodiversity, as we know, is on community lands. And even inside of Kenya, upwards of 2/3 or greater of the wildlife that we're all familiar with, this very charismatic wildlife, exists outside of the national parks. And so one of the challenges to getting benefit down to the individual is the community land and trying to navigate these individual land title deeds and ownership so that the communities can directly benefit. So as Patita said, there's a number of challenges there. So we have some transparency gaps. Oftentimes there are projects that we were told benefit a community, but it's not clear how exactly that is benefiting the community. And oftentimes those benefits stop at the top and aren't distributed equitably. There's oftentimes the community is not properly engaged and onboarded through free prior informed consent. And then even when we're doing nature restoration activities, sometimes we don't get granular data on the improvement in nature that we see. So it's very difficult to deliver direct and auditable payments because of the nature of thousands of land titles, but still under community management. And this is something that EarthAcre has taken on directly as a challenge to go forward and onboard individual landowners onto a system so that we have the ability to track and trace not only the free prior informed consent, but also the monetary transfers that take place for unlocking new payments for ecosystem services. And then lastly, the data around the changes that we see, the positive uplift in nature and biodiversity. But because of the structure that we have today, this is one of the reasons why we see the land use change that we do, which, as you can see here, sometimes results in sales or the building of a quarry or some unsustainable farming. So, as I mentioned before, at EarthAcre, we're pioneering a new model for nature stewardship where communities are onboarded via free prior informed consent. There is a rigorous measurement of nature outcomes, and we have direct, trackable, and traceable benefits down to the individual.
As my colleague has ably said, as a result of lack of participation, lack of engagement in decision making, the communities previously were concerned, and they would take a lot of time to engage into any of these projects. And so there has been a call to ensure that there's free, prior, and informed consent before the communities can actually be fully onboarded onto programs. And so EarthAcre really has a strategy that ensures these communities are involved from the very onset of the project, all through to monitoring, and even as the project, for the lifetime of the project, they are engaged. So involving all these stakeholders, identifying who they are, what role they play within the community, is one of our first stages of the free, prior, and informed consent. And then at this point, then we move to two-way information sharing. We would like to understand at EarthAcre, what is the baseline? What are these communities currently doing? How are they managing their land? How are they getting an income? What does this income go towards? What challenges are they facing? And so then we also get to share with them what products EarthAcre has and how, at this point is where now, by sharing the information on both sides, we can get to understand whether we are on the same page and are willing to proceed or actually do or want to implement a project within that area. And this also involves telling them what nature assets are. They do know they're managing them, but they don't know how this is monetized. They do have indigenous knowledge, but getting to the point where it's documented, it's captured using technology. These are some of the things that we do to ensure that they really understand when we talk about that they own nature assets and the assets can then be monetized. This is the point where you do a lot of education and awareness and go on to do consultation. You consult with them and really get to understand that if they were to get additional income, or are they currently getting any other income from the management of the land that they do? And if they are, what is that source and how much of that do they get? And does the money come to them directly? Does it go to committees? And if they were to get money from nature assets, being biodiversity credits, for example, how would they like for that money to get to them? And this is where we then develop the project agreements, because we want this to go into the commitments that we make as an organization and the commitments that they make as a community. And then now we move on to negotiating, and this is where we get into MOUs, or what we would call Memorandum of Understanding. After we get a letter of intent that is exchanged across the parties, where they give us information about them, about their land, about their details, and on the other hand, we also share with them who we are and how we do operate. Then we move on to what would be negotiations, which would be a memorandum of understanding, saying that we have understood what the nature assets are all about, what your credits are all about, and we want to benefit. So, and then we begin to share what the benefit sharing model is like. How is it that we wish to engage all other stakeholders who are not necessarily the landowners, and the community then gives us consent. And at this point, then now we are in a partnership and we are in agreement. So then we begin to operate based on the memorandum of understanding. And also through the FPIC process, we establish the grievance mechanism. There will be challenges as we progress with the project. These are projects that would last about 15 to 40 years. So definitely then we define how we are going to address the grievance mechanism. Who will we engage, and at what stage are we going to engage these parties, so that we ensure that there's understanding of how to manage issues, and if there's any conflict that will arise, how that will be managed. And then also establish how we'll continuously monitor the project, and what is the role of this community in the project lifeline, and how are we going to do the knowledge transfer between the two parties. So this is generally how to describe how the project will be managed by both parties, and also looking at how do communities assign the rights of this nature to us, and understand that what we are going to do with these rights, and eventually when the sale is made, how is it that we are going to share the benefits that come out of the revenue. So in a nutshell, generally, this is really the backbone of engaging these communities, and is stipulated in the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People. It's also a requirement, for example, by the government of Kenya, talking about the need for people to effectively participate in decision-making in the nature asset management. So this is really a part and parcel and really core to EarthAcre, to ensure that the community does understand and is critical in the decision-making and running of the project.
So we have spent much more time talking about communities and land use change, but we really think that that is the core of the problem and what EarthAcre is directly trying to address and solve for, so that we can scale and unlock more monetary flows for nature stewardship beyond what we're doing today. Because we think that this is a point of frustration for funders, is not being able to see how these benefits are working all the way down to the individual and how those communities are benefiting. And then also having rigorous measurement of the impact on nature associated with that. So to this latter point, we are combining expertise from Harvard specifically to do so, working with the Davies Lab, which is run by Andrew Davies, who is South African, and specifically specializes in the measurement of biodiversity capacity. So we don't have time, nor do we have Andrew, to go into the detail that we would love to talk about this subject with, if you have interest. But just briefly, we're using some remote sensing tools, which you can see in the first box is actually a LiDAR image from LiDAR data, a 3D picture. And we're able, with the Davies Lab, to capture resolution down to 2 centimeters so that you can see the leaves on trees and actual blades of grass, and create an incredibly rich picture of the biodiversity capacity of the existing landscape. Then we combine that with ground observations, which are uploaded from stations using things like camera traps, but also acoustic monitoring. And then working with the local community and leveraging indigenous knowledge that is hundreds, if not thousands of years old, in terms of doing things like bird surveys and other activities. And then over time, scaling those insights up so that we can do this over a large swath of land in an efficient manner. And I should add to Patita's comments, and this is a good time to talk about it because we have had funding from companies like Klarna and Milky Wire who have opened a biodiversity fund. And our payments, which we haven't talked about, we have over 2/3 of the payments go directly to the community that EarthAcre receives for nature stewardship. And we engage the local community as well to be our intervention coordinators, to actually be taking the steps on the ground to improve the land and improve the biodiversity capacity with that, whether that's managed grazing or ranger training or removing invasive species. So once we're able to unlock these additional payments and overcome these challenges in transparency and the complexity of land tenure, we have a great degree of confidence that we will see more companies wanting to have a positive nature impact and using these type of solutions to do so through nature assets and working with EarthAcre and other pioneers in this field who are also doing excellent work. These are our 3 trial sites today, listed on the map here, which you can see kind of along the border of Tanzania. And they all have a little bit different characteristics. And so we are testing our technology and developing it in different landscapes, starting with savanna grassland ecosystems, but then even looking at some cloud forest in the Taita Taveta sublandscape. So the goal, of course, is to deliver nature finance with confidence. And EarthAcre is a project developer, but we also partner with other project developers via a new platform that we have developed that takes care of some of these challenges we talked about of onboarding the community and making sure that we can keep track of land title deeds that are very complex and make sure that payments go down to those individual level and that it's trackable and traceable. And then with that, we're producing high integrity nature assets that will unlock payments for new ecosystem services for these communities, and then providing with scientific rigor the data to back up those claims. So I think I'll stop there and see if my colleague Patita would like to add anything else.
So these decisions and this the design of the project continues to put that decision making to the community, empowering those structures for the communities to be able to, say what they want to see on their land, on their assets, and also recognizing the different roles that the genders play within society. If some of these funds go towards empowering girl child education, this is done at family level. So it means that the family recognizes the need to take the girl child to school, the need to give the girl child an equal chance to go to school. So in a way, this product not only just does the empowerment of the household at economic level or aspect, but also the other social, environmental aspects of the community.
That was excellent. And now we're happy to take questions. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mark and Patita, for your interesting presentation on how you work and empower nature stewards. And also thank you to all our speakers who have been answering questions on our Q&A. As a note to all of our attendees, we are at 10 a.m. Eastern time in the US, so we understand if some of you need to sign off. Fortunately, some of our panelists are able to stay with us for a few minutes. So with that, Mark and Patita, one of the questions that we received is about your monitoring methodologies. You're mentioning using technological innovation for the measurement and monitoring of biodiversity through your partnership with this research lab at Harvard, and also groundwork with the communities. Can you speak a little bit more about the contribution the communities are doing in this monitoring, and if you had to train them, for example, on the management of camera traps or acoustic recorders that you mentioned.
Great. Patita, you want to take that one about some of the training that was done for the bird surveys and then also installing some of the acoustic monitoring devices and camera traps?
Yeah, let me speak to that, and then maybe you might add on to that. First, let me start by saying that, as I mentioned, this indigenous knowledge already exists within these communities. They know this type of species, they appear at different seasons, they know all these things, and they know the relationship between the species and the land and themselves. What has been the gap is the recording. If they hear a bird, they will know what sound of a bird that is, but they were not previously recording it because, of course, then they didn't have the technology. So we say that our product does really, when you look at the product, it does show that indigenous knowledge that has been harnessed from the community, because then since they already know, what we do is to train them on how to, for example, use the acoustics. And this becomes more effective because they already know. So it's only a matter of applying the technology to be able to get the data, to be able to get the information. They also know, for example, what seasons certain species appear. So even as we do planning on when to do our assessments and monitoring, we include that indigenous knowledge onto our programming so that we know when is it that we need to set up the acoustics, where do we need to set them up, and we have the oral recordings, or we have the oral information that they've given us, and we compare it with what we get from camera traps and acoustics. And one or the other, that correlates, because whatever they have been telling us all along, you actually get to see. Certain birds appear just before the rain. Certain plants sprout just before the rains, or certain signs correlate to what they tell us. So that harnessing of indigenous knowledge in our product is key, and makes it very, how do I put it? The community can actually get to see their knowledge in product development. So for us, that has been the capacity gap we've filled. But on the other hand, we've also learned, because as we say, they know, but putting that data together is what we have been also teaching them. So it's a two-way kind of information sharing. They teach us, and we also get to capacity build them.
Thank you so much, Patita, for your response. I think, unfortunately, we're running a little bit out of time, but I'm sure many of the points and questions that we received during these sessions will be discussed and answered on our following sessions in this 4-part series. With that, I would like to thank David, Fortson, Mark, and Patita for their wonderful presentations and for everything that they shared with us today. I will hand it back to you, Fred, for some closing announcements. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jorge, and thank you to our speakers for your wonderful presentations. We apologize for going beyond the hour, but we would like to close with a few announcements. The admissions for the Tropical Forest Landscape Online Certificate Program is still open. So it's open up till the April 28th, 2025. So if you are still applying, we will encourage you to submit your application on time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on our website. Our email is tropicalcertificate@yale.edu. You can also visit our website and subscribe to our mailing list to receive all our upcoming events. We remind you that this session has been recorded and we posted on our YouTube channel. You can also visit the channel to watch other webinars that we have over there. Last year, we had one on agroforestry and carbon credits, which was very interesting. So you can visit the YouTube channel and watch that one too. Next week, we will continue on this webinar series on April 10, exactly at 9 a.m. EDT, and we will be joined by Mariana Samiamento, who is the CEO and founder of Terrazos in Colombia, and R. Sanjay Samesh, who is an independent consultant for nature-based solutions in India. Finally, on behalf of the Webinar Planning Committee, I would like to say a big thank you to our speakers and also to Dr. Florencia Montagnini and Dr. David Meyers, who was with us today, for helping us identify speakers for this series. We'd also like to say a big thank you to Jorge Forero for moderating today's session. So with that, I will say thank you and take care. See you same time next week.